This podcast may contain explicit language. Welcome to the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast, the show that uses a unique grading style to redefine what the greatest movies are. I'm Tom Duncan.
And I'm Dana Duncan.
And as you can see, we are not in our normal setups. We're coming to you live from some random hotel in the Albuquerque area. Not Albuquerque itself, because of course we can't stay right in Albuquerque. We have to stay in the suburbs next to it for cheap
savings. We took a wrong turn there.
Yeah, something like that. But anyway, before we get to that, we also want to welcome in our returning celebrity guest, the now newest member of the 5-Time Club, host and creator of Shea Cinema, making her 5th appearance on the show to date. It's Sara Shea!
Tom, Dana, thank you so much for having me. I cannot believe that I am actually here for the 5th time already. I feel like we speed dated through 5 episodes, and I'm so excited to be here to actually talk about a film that I think most people wouldn't expect that I know, let alone enjoy. So thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And I will say, before I left Wisconsin, your hat went out in the mail.
I know it did. And you know where it was this morning? I checked. Somewhere in Arizona. It was supposed to be here days ago.
Yeah, I never go by their timeline. They'll always tell me it's like 3 or 4 days, and then 2 weeks later, it finally gets there.
Yeah, I've been obsessively checking like my alerts, and I'm like, I'm excited. I was hoping I could wear it today, but it is not here yet.
And I know Kieran was on the show 2 weeks ago. I am hoping he has his t-shirt by the time that he is on in a couple of weeks again.
That's awesome. I hope he does too. By the way, I really liked your episode on Grapes of Wrath. So thank you for doing that show as well. It's a delight to hear the 3 of you again together talking about a movie that I love. So really enjoyed the insights and the dialogue. And maybe I wasn't super impressed with Kieran's debrief on Bull Durham, but we can't have everything.
It's all right. Our last episode that came out this morning made Andrew so angry that he went full arms extended again in the YouTube comments.
Oh boy.
Because we didn't get high enough marks to Toy Story.
Yeah,
he's tied for 14th with The Godfather Part 2. I don't think he has much to complain about.
Wait. I'm supposed to say something. Oh yeah, please put Tom on blast for me tonight for not giving Toy Story a full 10 on legacy and impact. Insane behavior. So don't shoot the messenger. I'm just delivering the message.
And you said it with such passion. Oh.
I'm sorry. I don't know how to do the angry Andrew voice.
Well, you did it the perfect way because without Eddie, because that's the way it should be.
Yeah.
Whine, complain, and bitch.
I hear
his wife's 3 pet names, I'm sure.
I like Toy Story, but yeah, I don't know. Sorry, not sorry, Andrew.
But anyway. This podcast does not need to be about Andrew again.
Again. It's about him every time.
If he wants to be out and talk about Toy Story, fine. Let's just give him an open mic and he can rant for several minutes and make himself feel good.
Given that he shares this Riverside platform with us, he could literally record something and drop it into an episode without my knowledge if he really wanted to.
I'm sure he could.
I just want to hear him say challenge accepted.
Is Andrew becoming our own version of Don Rickles?
I don't think he's ornery enough for that.
No, he's totally not ornery enough.
Yeah, well,
he gets too much beauty sleep for that.
He's a pretty boy. Yeah.
Okay, I think we should move on before we lost the audience completely.
Yes.
Anyway, for tonight's episode, for our 255th episode, we discussed Patton, directed by Franklin J. Schaffner, written by Francis Ford Coppola and Edward H. North, music by Jerry Goldstein, cinematography by Fred J. Konekamp, starring George C. Scott as the titular George S. Patton, Carl Malden as General Omar N. Bradley, David Bauer as Lieutenant General Harry Buford, Edward Binns as Lieutenant General Walter Bedell Smith, John Doucette as Major General Lucian Truscott, Michael Strong as Brigadier General Hobart Gay, Paul Stevens as Colonel Charles R. Codman, Morgan Paul as Captain Richard N. Jensen, Tim Considine as a shell-shocked soldier, Michael Bates as Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, Jack Gwillem as Field Marshal Sir Harold Alexander, Gerald Flood as Air Chief Marshal Sir Arthur Tedder, John Barry as Air Vice Marshal Sir Arthur Conyngham, Frank Lattimore as Lieutenant Colonel Henry Davenport, Carl Michael Vogler as Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, Richard Munch as Colonel General Alfred Yodel, and Siegfried Rauch as Captain Oscar Steiger. Background for the movie: Patton was wide released on April 2nd, 1970, making this its 55th anniversary. On a budget of $12.6 million, the film would gross roughly $62.5 million to finish as the number 4 film of 1970 at the worldwide box office. And this is normally the part where I ask you what was ahead of it. Anybody?
No, I don't remember. I didn't.
Love Story?
Love Story was number 1.
Okay.
Airport 2.
Okay.
MASH was 3.
Yeah, that
Okay.
makes sense.
And to round out the top 5, The Aristocats.
The Aristocrats. Wrong movie. Sorry.
And very wrong joke.
No, correct joke.
Yeah.
That's a deep dive.
Patton was met with widespread critical acclaim, especially for George C. Scott in the title role. The film was nominated for 10 Academy Awards, including cinematography, original score, and special visual effects, winning 7 awards for Best Picture, Director for Schaffner, Actor for Scott, Story and Screenplay for Coppola and North, Art Direction, Film Editing, and Sound. While George C. Scott won the Academy Award for Best Actor, he declined it, citing a dislike of the voting process and the concept of acting competitions. He was the first actor to do so. The film's producer, Frank McCarthy, accepted the award on Scott's behalf. The Best Picture statuette is on display at the George C. Marshall Museum at the Virginia Military Institute, courtesy of Frank McCarthy. In 2006, the Writers Guild of America selected Francis Ford Coppola and Edmund H. North's adapted screenplay as the 94th best screenplay of all time. The American Film Institute has recognized it on the following lists: AFI's 100 Years, 100 Movies at number 89, and for 100 Years, 100 Heroes and Villains, with George S. Patton as the 29th hero of all time. In 2003, Patton was selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry. It has also been preserved in the Academy Film Archive since 2003. Patton currently holds a 92% among critics on Rotten Tomatoes, an 86 score on Metacritic, and a 3.9 out of 5 on Letterboxd. So as we begin each week, Dad, what is your relationship to this film?
Well, I was searching through my memory trying to remember the first time I saw it, and I found a clip and figured out exactly when the first time was I saw this. When it was first broadcast on network television in November of 1972. I will guarantee I watched it, because about that time I was a huge buff of World War II, reading books and magazines and anything I could get my hands on World War II. And the minute this would have been advertised, I would have been right there watching it.
Now, please advise the audience on how old you were in 1972.
I would have been turning 9 2 weeks later.
So you were 8 years old, eating up military history.
Yes. I had been purchasing, they were 50 cents each. It was my allowance money. The History of World War II magazine. And could not, I would sit and lay in bed at night, past when I was supposed to have the light out, reading these magazines and studying World War II for months, probably more like a couple of years.
I hear nerd alert.
Okay, I didn't get into comic books. I read this stuff.
All right. Well, as most people can probably anticipate, my relationship to this film is entirely through the prism of my father. I think I watched it for the first time probably in my teens, preteens, somewhere in that area. It was after probably I was like 10. I didn't know what the fuck I was watching. So I won't even really count it as being the first time. It was the first time that I saw the images from Patton, but it was not the first time that I watched the movie. I would guess that I rewatched it sometime in college, and I'm not sure if it was when I was, again, trying to go through certain Best Picture films for ones that, like, I had seen when I was younger, but I probably didn't understand, so I was rewatching just to make sure I had a general understanding of all of these. General understanding. And I don't know. I guess I have seen it probably 3 or 4 times. I remember watching it with you on the one weekend. I think we did a Father's Day weekend where we let you choose all of the movies, and they all happen to be like military movies.
That sounds awesome.
It was like Saving Private Ryan and Patton and
Battle of the Bulge with Henry
I don't remember
Fonda.
watching that one, but it was what's the one with John Wayne on Not the Longest Day? Sands of Iwo Jima. I know that one we also saw.
A Bridge Too Far.
Yes. Okay. That one I remember too.
Sign me up. Yeah. That sounds fun.
I had a blast. Everybody else was falling asleep, but I had fun.
Yeah, I had a great nap.
Well, let me just say that my experience with this film, or my relationship to this film, I'm just outside of the edge of being a nerd about this film, because I saw this when I was about 10 years old. I know that Patton was one of the very first movies that was released on VHS, and we got to watch it. So my dad showed it to me when we got our own VCR, and I was around 10 at that time. My brother would have been 8, and he's the one who super nerded it up and like loved this movie a lot along with all of us. And so I grew up with this film and watched it so many times. In 1989, which is around when I saw this movie for the first time, I was 10 years old, and I listed my favorite movies as The Little Mermaid, because duh, and Patton as a 10-year-old girl. So it doesn't make sense, but I saw this movie so often, and my dad loves this movie as well. And I had just talked to him on the phone before we hopped on here just to kind of check in with him really quickly. And he told me that he actually saw this movie when it was released in theaters. He was 22 years old, and he actually went with his father, my grandfather, also William Shea, who actually served under Patton in World War II. And so they had a special connection to the movie. And my dad was telling me that going to the movie with Granddad, he was kind of surprised and touched how much Granddad liked the movie and responded to it, because he never really talked about his war experiences very much, as most veterans of that time don't or didn't do. And so this movie kind of just holds a special place in my heart, having seen it at such a young age, understanding it at such a young age. I don't know how many times I've actually seen it. I've watched it 3 times over the last 5 days, but I also haven't seen it in about 20 years. And I've avoided it for 20 years because once my brother was killed in Iraq, I couldn't watch any more war movies, essentially. It's been really, really difficult. So revisiting this as an adult was a different experience from watching it as a kid, but also having not seen it for 20 years post the death of my brother was an even different experience. And so I feel like this movie, maybe more than other movies that I really, really like, has probably inhabited a deep part of who I am as a person and my understanding of the world at large and things like that. So I know it's weird. Middle-aged white lady likes this movie and loves this movie, but it's formative for me as a child and then growing up with it, essentially.
So normally I would ask a different question here, but I think I'll reverse the order a little bit. Dad, why do you love this movie so?
First off, I've always had a fascination with military history, simply because military history is really the ultimate exemplification of politics in its ultimate form, where it's the last resort. And what it does is, and especially this film, what this film really is that history is made by individuals who are flawed. They're not heroes. We like to make them heroes, but they're very much flawed heroes. Patton was extremely egotistical, was difficult, was quite the bastard. In fact, they could have done even a worse job of portraying him in this film than he did, because he was a notorious womanizer. In fact, one of the reasons why he was almost recalled was not just the slapping incident, but the fact that he was carrying on an affair with his daughter's best friend, who was working as a war correspondent in Europe at the time. And so it was all over that he was sleeping with her publicly and taking her to different events, things, where he had to show up politically. And so he's got this woman half his age, his daughter's age, that he's hanging around with while his wife's back home. And so they could have had all that in the film as well. So ultimately, I guess that's what I'm getting at is that history is ultimately made by people, and they get called to certain functions and situations, and they rise to those occasions where their skills, their abilities, their circumstances meet, and they have an impact on how we end up ultimately. And that's George Patton. Very, very flawed individual, militarily brilliant, but a complete ass.
I saw a lot of critics' reviews from the time kind of comparing this to Lawrence of Arabia. And I would say it's also similar to some other biopics we've had of this era. Oppenheimer, probably the most recent example of a flawed individual who is going through a military kind of situation. He's undergoing an immense event in world history and has a significant place on what happens overall that shapes world history. But those flaws are not necessarily swept under the surface. However, the way that he is portrayed is in some ways to me problematic because of what some of his beliefs may come out as. I think while he... All right, I'll just put this out on Front Street instead of waiting till the end of the show. I've essentially decided that this program, and for whatever platform we've built for ourselves, will be part of the resistance going forward of this current administration. I have reached my wit's end of stomaching 2 months of just utter buffoonery and things that I deem to be, frankly, un-American, that don't realize our particular values or what I think it is to be an American. And so this entire program will be about diversity, inclusion, and equity, because I certainly don't want to be about uniformity, exclusion, or inequity. So with that in mind, I'll just say there are some things that Patton says in this movie, while maybe factual, are somewhat triggering because of the way he delivers some of the epithets that come from a point of view or a worldview that I find to be somewhat troubling. That force is the only thing that makes right, that everybody has a certain manifest destiny of what their character's supposed to be, that he sees himself up on this pedestal, and so he can forego the rules for the interests of himself because he has a greater part to play instead of looking for the public good. And that's how we end up having dictators.
So my question for you, Tom, in response to that, yes, of course, we now in the 21st century would view his views as being incredibly problematic. But do you think that the film actually presents those views and lauds them, or actually presents those views as being highly problematic? Because I see the film as being like, here he is, warts and all, and he is a fucking asshole, and we're going to regard him as a genius, but also someone who was incredibly prejudiced and biased, and we're going to say sexist, even though we don't see any of those things apparent in the film. But a racist, abso-freaking-lutely. So I get why you say that about him as a person, but he is a person of his time. And guess what? This movie was made not of his time. And I feel like this movie does a pretty good frickin' job of holding up the mirror and saying, this is a guy who is controversial, and we can kind of, one of the phrases that we keep using, we're going to separate the artist from the person, right? We can recognize the good things that someone has done, but they're a horrible person over here. And I think that this movie makes no apologies for his behavior and expects the audience to recognize that he's not okay, while also being very good at his job.
Before I let you jump in, Dad,
All right.
I will respond to this a little bit directly. In some ways, this is the exact fight that we've had on several movies, the most notable example being Fight Club, where what the movie promotes, or what we perceive the movie to promote, while it's potentially troubling, is up for some level of interpretation. While I agree with you, it does a decent job of presenting him as a complicated, flawed figure, which I don't hold any issue with against the film. There is a tone that is brightly lit, that is him in his triumphant moments. Even though it's showing his downside, it's not showing his full fall from grace, or even bringing up some of the most troubling and problematic things that it probably could have about him. It leaves a little bit of the mystery to be there. And I do think the score kind of presents him in this, we should be championing people like this who took on the Nazis and defeated them all. And I'm not sure in totality, while I do think it does a decent job of not going all in one side or the other, I do think it does, especially with Scott's performance, give you some level of heroism of Patton.
No, I disagree. There are 3 heroes in this film. Number 1 is one you never see. It's
Eisenhower.
Dwight Eisenhower.
100%.
Number 2, it's Omar Bradley.
100%.
Okay, these guys knew the politics. And what they did is they had a nasty, rusty, misfiring type of weapon that they could use when they needed to, and they did. And the third hero is the Allied war effort. And they were willing to utilize what tools they had at their disposal to pursue the war effort. And in this particular case, the triumphant is not Patton per se, it's his military genius put into the context of the war and limited in his ability to not defeat himself.
Well, right. And so I would, Dana, I 100% agree with you. And I think that the fact that Ike is a huge character in this story who is never seen, it's almost like he's God. He goes on to become the president, right? One of the things that's upsetting to Patton is saying, just let me be a soldier. I don't have any political aspirations after the war. He has a huge fall from grace. He's essentially booted out of everything. Yes, he helps with all of these things, but he does not go on to have any glory after the war. First of all, he dies, right? So he doesn't make it, but he's not good enough of a human to aspire beyond what he's doing, because Eisenhower does that. Bradley is a better person than Patton, and says that to his face over and over again. So while we're being like, he's a hero, and while it's kind of funny to me as an adult, knowing that Patton is on the hero list and not on the villain list or in some other, like, we've got a problem list, as an adult watching this film now, he's not a hero. Not in the way that Eisenhower is a hero or Bradley is a hero, or guess what? Jensen is a hero, the guys who never make it home. So we laud Patton because yes, he took on the fucking Nazis, but doesn't it make your skin crawl when he's like, I want to go over and start fighting the Japs? Yeah, it does. And it should, because he's an asshole, right? So I think that presentism isn't a problem with this film, because I feel like us in the 21st century, 55 years later, are viewing it through the same lens, more or less, that the audiences were in 1970. However, they were much more closer to the end of the war, right? And so there is going to be some softness or tenderness regarding Patton from people like my granddad, who was there in the theater watching him, remembering serving under him, and those types of things. And I think that we, having not fought in wars and not having had that experience, can never understand the way that he would be regarded in that sense.
As a historian, just to show this level of his intelligence, they downplayed what he accomplished at the Battle of the Bulge, because he had predicted that the offense was going to take place in the Ardennes a week before it started. They all said he had his people in place, drawing up battle plans like the day or a couple of days before. They've now established clearly that he had his people starting to draw up battle plans to move north to the Ardennes a week before the Ardennes, or before the offensive of the Bulge even started, because he had anticipated that that's the likely place that the Germans would attack, because it was the weak point in the lines. So of course he was able to do it, because he foresaw something that no one else saw. He just didn't dare tell anybody, because everybody would have said he was nuts. And then it happened, and he had everything in place, and it was not that difficult to have an ability to draw plans to move people out of position, turn them 90 degrees, and march hundreds of miles north into combat in the middle of winter.
So what is the film about?
As I indicated, it's about how history is made by complex individuals who are not clean, nice, wonderful people by themselves. They're flawed individuals, and sometimes they have certain abilities and characteristics that are used in a moment in time to achieve great results. And as much as Patton is a flawed individual, he was instrumental in the Allied success in Europe during World War II.
No real notes on that. I mean, the flaws say it all in some capacity, because you do focus a lot on those. I mean, it becomes the rising and falling action of most of the second half of the movie. But you also have to credit his accomplishments as being a central figure in preserving at least Western democracy for the 20th century.
And he didn't learn his lesson.
No.
What caused his downfall and then rise back up caused his downfall again. His stupidity, his inability to be politically expedient, and to keep his mouth shut.
I think this is the time of year, every school year, where I'm in the middle of doing Macbeth. And one of the themes of Macbeth is this man who is so caught up with ambition that he's willing to do whatever it is. He grapples with it internally and externally a whole heck of a lot. And so while I'm thinking about Patton and this parallel storyline, I'm not comparing Patton to Macbeth, okay? This crazy, murderous king, but I'm also not comparing him. So there's this idea of, it is really his ambition and him saying, I need to be in the thick of this. This is my job. This is everything that I was built for. I have no identity side of this. He says that several times. He's convinced that he's been reincarnated over millennia as a soldier. And so, one, he's batshit crazy. But I think that it's the ego and the ambition, right? The vaulting ambition that I see represented in a character like Macbeth, who also was a real person. I'm seeing that it's something about that you could almost use Patton as a historical figure, as something of an allegory or a metaphor for kind of that human search for meaning. And are you choosing the appropriate methods in which to find yourself and find that meaning? He just happens to have chosen war as how he defines himself. And then there's nothing else for him.
The absolute nerve for you to go out on a limb and say that Francis Ford Coppola, how dare he write a Shakespearean script during the 70s?
You know what? I'm so dumb. I didn't know until about 5 days ago, when I was actually really paying attention to stuff, that Coppola wrote the screenplay. And I feel like an idiot that I've spent my entire life and loved this movie and had no clue. That's not something I was thinking about when I was 10, right? So
what?
I know I am also disappointed in myself. Yeah.
In your 10-year-old self.
In my 10-year-old self. Yes.
Well, I suppose in your pre 5 days ago self.
Right. My 2 weeks ago self. Jesus Christ.
Well, for the expedience of time, Dad, are you ready to dig more into the movie? Do you have our plot summary ready for us?
Yes. Sweeping and complex portrait of a man consumed by ambition, Patton charges through history with ferocity and contradictions. A gladiator on the modern battlefield. In the chaos and grandeur of World War II, Patton's genius and ego collide, alienating allies and enthralling enemies. Hero and antihero. The film unveils his brutal poetry of war, a relentless quest for glory at any cost, and the haunting question of whether he is made for or destroyed by the brutal theater of combat.
Thank you. Did you know? The movie begins without showing the 20th Century Fox logo or any other indication that the film is starting. At military bases across the U.S. theater, owners reported that soldiers in the audience would often stand up and snap to attention when they heard the movie's opening line, "Ten Hut," assuming it was to be a real call to attention. Did you know? The ivory-handled revolvers George C. Scott wears in the opening speech were George S. Patton's real-life revolvers. Those pistols are in the collection of the museum at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. Did you know? Patton was first telecast by ABC as a 3 hours plus color film special on Sunday, November 19th, 1972, only 2 years after its theatrical release. That was highly unusual at the time, especially for a roadshow release, which had played in theaters for many months. Most theatrical films at that time had to wait at least 5 years for their first telecast. Another unusual element of the telecast was that almost none of Patton's profanity-laced dialogue was cut. Only 2 sentences, one of which contained no profanity, were cut from the famous opening speech in the front of the giant U.S. flag. The film was the 4th highest-rated film broadcast on television in the United States at the time, with a Nielsen rating of 38.5 and an audience share of 65%. Did you know? Coppola and North had to tone down Patton's actual words and statements in the scene, as well as throughout the rest of the film, to avoid an R rating. In the opening monologue, the word fornicating replaced fucking when he was criticizing the Saturday Evening Post. Also, Scott's gravelly and scratchy voice is the opposite of Patton's high-pitched, nasal, and somewhat squeaky voice, a point noted by historian S.L.A. Marshall. However, Marshall also points out that the film contains too much cursing and obscenity by Patton. Patton was not a habitually foul-mouthed person. He used dirty words when he thought they were needed to impress. Did you know? Lee Marvin, Burt Lancaster, John Wayne, Robert Mitchum, and Rod Steiger declined the role of Patton. Steiger later said it was his greatest mistake. Charlton Heston was considered for the role of Omar Bradley before Carl Malden was also cast. Did you know? According to Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein's book The Final Days, it was also Richard Nixon's favorite film. Nixon first viewed Patton with his family at a private screening in the White House Family Theater on April 5th, 1970. Nixon became obsessed with the film, repeatedly watching it with Henry Kissinger over the next month. He screened it several times at the White House and during a cruise on the presidential yacht USS Sequoia in the Potomac River. Did you know? The scene where General Lucian K. Truscott Jr. tells Patton, "You are an old athlete yourself, General. You know matches are sometimes postponed," refers to the fact that George S. Patton actually had represented the U.S. at the 1912 Olympic Games in Stockholm by competing in the modern pentathlon. Patton finished a creditable 5th in the competition. Remarkably, it was the shooting element that let him down. In true Patton style, he used his military 38 cal revolver instead of the lighter 22 cal favored by most of the athletes. Patton was also an expert fencer. He rewrote the U.S. Army's manuals on swordsmanship, removing the parry. His idea was for all attack. Defense just wasted energy. Such was his mastery of swordsmanship that he designed the last saber ever to be worn into battle as a weapon, the M1913 Cavalry Saber, commonly known as the Patton Saber. And finally, did you know? The scene during the Battle of the Bulge where Patton orders the 3rd Army chaplain to compose a weather prayer actually happened. The chaplain, Colonel James Hugh O'Neill, reluctantly composed a weather prayer, which Patton had printed on the back of postcards and handed out to the men of his army. When the weather cleared, Patton was so grateful he awarded the chaplain a Bronze Star on the spot. And with that, we take our first break, and we will be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, next week for our 256th episode, we welcome back 5-time club member, comedian and host of Midnight Facts for Insomniacs, Shane Rogers, to discuss a cult classic of 2015, Ex Machina, for its 10th anniversary. Written and directed by Alex Garland, cinematography by Rob Hardy, music by Ben Salisbury and Jeff Barrow, starring Alicia Vikander, Oscar Isaac, and Domhnall Gleeson. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. Before we move too much further, Sarah, what's going on with you and where can people find you?
Yeah, so my show is Shea Cinema. It is a format very similar to Greatest Movie of All Time. It is me and my father, and we are going through all of the films that have been nominated for the Academy Award for Best Picture, but we are doing them in chronological order because he and I are both history nerds and we want to know all of the historical context. We just last week had an episode out on the winner of the 6th Academy Award for Outstanding Production, Cavalcade, which is incidentally Hitler's favorite movie of all time. Later this week, maybe not this week, next week, so this week is so busy, we'll have an episode out on She Done Him Wrong, starring Mae West, which is the shortest film ever nominated for the Academy Award for Best Picture. Amazing pre-code film full of delicious innuendo. We're going to have an episode on State Fair. Eventually, we're going to release this episode that we did with Andrew Corns on King Kong. And then Dad and I are going to actually be recording new episodes soon, which I'm really, really excited about. Other than that, I just recorded an episode on a new release, Black Bag, going to be on Movies and Us podcast alongside our friend Clarissa in a couple days. By the time this comes out, it'll have already happened, but in a couple days doing an Instagram live with Andrew and Clarissa to go over the stuff for our episode on 1934 that we didn't get to on the actual show because we had so many things to talk about. We made history on that podcast because we actually all chose the Best Picture winner as the Best Picture winner. So lots of stuff happening right now, but also I'm exhausted because school. It's only 9 weeks until it's summer break and that's already too long. I'm ready. I'm ready for school to be over already. So yeah.
I can definitely appreciate that.
Yeah.
Especially today.
Yeah.
So we left off at best performance. Dad, who did you have down?
Boy, this is going to really shock you, but George C. Scott.
Oh, darn. This is one where I knew that I was going to have the same one as you, and I don't care because it's clearly the best performance of the film. Yes, it's George C. Scott.
So I knew that we were all going to say George C. Scott. So I'm going to put something else in for best performance. And I'm actually going to say best performance has to go to the screenwriters, Francis Ford Coppola and Edward North, because nobody else could have played Patton for sure. Like, Scott absolutely deserves all of the congratulations and idolatry for his performance. But fundamentally, the script and the storytelling is so strong that even me, again, as a 10-year-old watching this film, not being the target audience, I knew what was going on. The themes were able to resonate with me. I think this film is infinitely quotable. So many good things, the amount of research that had to be done, piecing things together, choosing what goes in, what gets taken out, all of that type of stuff. The movie doesn't function with less skilled writers. It was so good. And of course it did win the Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay. And so obviously it's Scott, but need to mention the screenwriters, because that's where this film begins, is that vision and then putting it all together.
So they actually wrote this at separate times.
I know.
Coppola wrote the original treatment in like 1963 and then was shopping it around for years before it finally got picked up. And then they brought in Edward H. North for like I some level of like script doctoring or something to just spice it up, which is hard to believe about a Coppola script.
But they still went back, I think, mostly with Coppola's original script, in particular the opening scene, which that was why people didn't want to do the film. They were like, we can't have that opening sequence. No one will sit through it. Yeah, I even not realizing until a few days ago that it was Coppola, I'd always really heavily admired the craft of putting the story together. And then of course it's genius in terms of the casting. So yeah.
And I would agree that he is the central figure, but the writing has to support him a lot. That's why I have specifically Coppola singled out as my best secondary, but the line delivery is so transcendent and captivating as a figure because of Scott's portrayal. So
100%.
Yes, absolutely he's number one, but I have no problem with the writers being either mentioned or best secondary in my particular case.
Yeah. Yeah.
For secondary performance, I figured you'd have Coppola, Tom, because, after all, there's a man crush.
Is that a problem?
It's a good choice.
I haven't seen Megalopolis, so I wouldn't know.
Nobody's perfect.
Yeah. But I have Schaffner, the director, Franklin Schaffner is the director, is the secondary performance, because I just thought the pacing of this was so good. And it took the pauses from the action was to convey or release some insights into Patton as a complex figure, so that you had the time to kind of decipher what was going on. So I just thought that the overall direction was well done and very deserving of Best Director.
Yeah, my best secondary performance, just from a purely acting perspective, super traditional, it has to be Carl Malden. I think he embodies Bradley so well. And going up against Scott's bombastic performance as Patton, you have Malden as Bradley offering not just as a historical character, but I think the way that he engenders with just a sense of humanity and being able to balance out Patton as this incredibly genius person who's also not very likable. And so who do you like when they're on screen? Constantly drawn to Malden. In fact, knowing this movie for the vast majority of my life and having it be one of the first films that I was into as a child, just in terms of film, I have a hard time seeing Malden in any other role without seeing him as Bradley. Same thing as Scott as Patton. Every time I see him in any other role, I'm kind of waiting for him to start yelling as Patton. So Carl Malden, I think, is best secondary performance.
I have him as charismatic for a lot of the same reasons, but more particularly the two roles that I think he's most famous for, at least on film, this and On the Waterfront, he's kind of the soul of the picture, and he portrays such like a good conscience figure, but never suffocating, that he's always trying to bring complicated and flawed individuals back to the light, that you kind of follow him as being that guy. He becomes the angel on your shoulder.
He even does that actually too in Streetcar Named Desire. Yeah, to a lesser effect, because he's still a little bit of a troubling character. But seeing him, for example, in the movie Baby Doll, he is not a likable character at all. I love that film. I love Tennessee Williams. He feels like a grandpa in this. He feels like a grandpa in this film, and I feel cozy watching him and kind of knowing like if he's the person who's in control of things and kind of pulling some of the strings and calling out some of the BS, I kind of feel like maybe the world's going to be okay. Because, and to concede your point very early on, Tom, that Patton's character, that's how we end up with dictators 100%. And we also don't end up with a dictator because we have people like Bradley and Carl Malden playing Bradley. Makes you feel safe, I think.
Yes, thank God for General Marshall and General Eisenhower.
Yes. I have Carl Malden for most charismatic, because he kind of had a stumble where as he started maturing, he didn't quite have the roles falling into his lap. This came up, and from this he ended up on television. And he had a hugely successful television show, The Streets of San Francisco, with Michael Douglas as the co-star in a cop drama. And from there, he went on for another decade doing American Express commercials. And so he was prolific in people's living rooms. And it's because he just portrayed this very likable, but very, no-nonsense individual who you trusted.
He could be stern without being problematic. It was like there are the authority figures that are disappointed in you and you actually feel shame. And then there are the ones that yell at you and you're like, fuck off.
And that is 100% Bradley and Patton. And I would definitely feel a little bit, even just being around George C. Scott because he portrayed Patton, I would definitely be like, okay, guy. But Carl Malden, definitely, I'd be like, oh, I've disappointed you for sure. Even just him as a human, I wouldn't want him to be disappointed in me. So you both chose Carl Malden as charismatic, right? And so for me, I actually grappled with this a little bit. I think acting, I would give it to Siegfried Rauch as Oscar Steiger. I was just fascinated by his performance, but really, I think truly most charismatic award has to go to the score by Jerry Goldsmith. The score is iconic in being this, at least in that the opening notes, as being rather understated. Yes, it goes up and out into this big grandiose thing, and it reminds me a lot of Fanfare for the Common Man by Aaron Copland, which was written in 1942 and it premiered in 1943. More credit is given to, say, like John Williams for copying Copland and things like that in a lot of his film scores, but I feel like Jerry Goldsmith runs the gamut with this score of being incredibly patriotic sounding for sure, but also a little bit more contemplative when we have scenes where we're watching absolute destruction, massacre, death, scenes where Patton is being a little bit more quiet and reflective about how he views himself in the universe. And I think with a different focus or a different composer, I don't think the film would have the same feel to it. I think the score is haunting in a way that at the time was different for this type of film.
As we're talking about this, the fact that the score has that patriotic feel, but then devolves into a discord where it's just these hollow notes, doesn't that actually convey both the patriotism and the lack of likability
Yes,
of Patton at the same time?
I think so, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that the score does a really good job of trying to guide the audience into influencing how are you supposed to be feeling without it being so overt as it can be in some other types of things. So yeah, I would agree with that.
Let's move to best scene then. I have 5 nominees here. I have the cold open, which is the famous speech at the beginning of the film. I have the tank battle in Tunisia. I have taking Messina first, which I have it more limited to when they're basically doing the parade, but you can expand that out to your own definition. I have the slap, and then I have the Battle of the Bulge, which, again, I will try and limit within a certain confluence of scenes, but not too much farther than probably what happened in the actual battle. So I know that for a nearly 3-hour movie that I've probably missed several things that are very dear to the both of you. What did I miss?
For me, I think, honestly, the plan for taking Palermo, which happens before Messina, I think is a little bit bigger of a deal than the taking of Messina. And I understand you talking about the parade where he finally meets Montgomery and they have a 2-second encounter. I think the dynamic components of Patton saying, I'm going to go against everything that everybody's told me, I'm going to kind of do this on my own without permission, to me feels more representative of him as a character, as a historical figure, as creating that tension more than him showing, like, you think Montgomery's walking into all of this stuff, again, pretending that we don't know anything outside of the film. We're just watching what's being presented in front of us. And then Patton's already there. That's a great, fun little moment. But the taking of Palermo before that, I think, is, to me, would be a better choice for an overall segment. But I think the best scene has to be the opening scene. The rest of the movie rests on this incredibly powerful speech. And it's so unusual.
As I said last week, I really like openings that are exposition dumps without being exposition dumps. And you know everything that you need to know about the figure that you're going to be following through the rest of the movie in that moment. And to open it with almost no fanfare for him to walk on the stage, deliver a point perfect speech, and to walk off as if he were just, this is ho-hum, this is what he does with his daily job, this is exactly what he believes and what he's about, and we're not going to follow this guy through the rest of the actual historical events. It's a masterclass. It is the definition of an Oscar-winning scene.
100%. And I would defy anyone watching the film to not want to go tackle someone after that speech. I mean, that speech has lived in my head pretty much my entire life, right? My brother and I memorized it when we were kids. We said it to each other all the time. In terms of filmmaking, I just think that it's by itself, in terms of starting a movie anyway. I think it would be amazing no matter where it was dropped. But the fact that it's the very first scene, do you need to watch the rest of the movie after seeing that scene? Some people might argue that you don't, but then it's a highlight reel, but it's that good. I think it really is that good. So for me, I don't know how you could choose any scene other than that as the best scene. There's more emotional scenes. There's other scenes that I like better on a personal level, but best scene has to be that scene.
Not only is it the best scene, I would be surprised if any of us don't have it as most indelible.
Correct. Yeah. 100%.
So then we'll basically just chalk it up. Dad, you also had it as the best scene, I'm assuming?
Yes.
Then we'll just chalk it up to what's your favorite scenes remaining. I'm going to go with the tank battle in Tunisia because I think it's the best representation of like a war situation, but you could choose a few different things in here.
Gosh, okay. So seeing this again as an adult after the death of my brother completely changed what I would view as my favorite scene. My favorite scene is the death of Jensen and Patton's voiceover for his little funeral procession. That lends a humanity to the movie that I think can be easily forgotten when we've got him slapping soldiers and screaming about cowardice, and the way that he lauds his aid and this fallen soldier, and knowing that Jensen's body is never going home. Okay. And they have that scene where they have the cemetery where he's talking to Jensen and they're looking out and he talks about Rommel and how he's going to send him an engraved iambic pentameter invitation to fight in the desert. But then he also says to Jensen, like, we're going to put guards here and stuff like that so that their bodies aren't messed with. And to realize that every soldier who died overseas literally never goes home. When my brother died, it took about 10 days for his body to come back home, which is actually quite an incredible feat if you think about it. And that we were able to have him back and we were able to have an actual funeral for him and actually bury him and do all of those things. But there's an entire generation in World War II, and of course World War I as well, right? Pretty much any war before Vietnam, for example. The power of that scene of him personally talking about Jensen as a hero, and he's idealizing him as a hero, right? He has no flaws or has no vices. I think he says, I think we all know that there's no human on this planet who doesn't have vices. And one of the struggles for us after my brother died is to not overly laud him as a hero just because he died in battle. He was a real person and he had real problems, but it's very, very easy to slide into he was a perfect human being because he died and we can never speak ill of him. But still, that moment to me is the one that resonates for me personally, and it would be very easy to shorten the movie and take that little scene out, but then you're removing again the reality of the situation for Patton, seeing him as a person with feelings, but then Jensen is representative of every single soldier that never came home. And I think it is so beautifully done. Voiceovers are problematic, but I think that little speech that he gives with the visuals of him walking behind the car. Anyway, I've gone on long enough. That is my favorite scene. Sorry, I killed it. Killed the vibe.
Nope, that's fine. Mine is the Battle of the Bulge. And it was before, but more so now. And I'll just tell this little story, which is we have a very good family friend, his first wife, her father or stepfather passed away. And we knew, everybody knew that Wally had fought in World War II, but didn't really know what was going on or anything like that. And other than the fact that he had asked to be taken by the kids to see Saving Private Ryan, that's the most he had talked about the war. But when he passed, they found a box in the closet, and in there was his Bronze Star and his Purple Heart and his commendation. And they had it all mounted, and I went up and I'm looking at this and I'm like, I'm in disbelief. And I went up to Andy and I said, do you understand what this stuff means? He goes, I think I do. I said, he was in the 101st Airborne at Bastogne. George Patton saved this guy's life. Probably. And so this flawed individual was able to turn events and save the Allied invasion, possibly save millions of lives in whether it be in concentration camps by the war ending faster or the men at Bastogne or whatever. And so if I ever doubted as to my favorite scene of the movie, it more so simply because I knew the man and knew what the impact was of his service and the influence of Patton.
Yeah, I thank you for sharing that. My grandfather was also in the Battle of the Bulge, so that's where he served under Patton as well. It's pretty powerful.
I'll relieve the heaviness. This is a good spot for our second break. We'll be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, and before we get to the Stanley Rubric in a minute, if you're ever curious about our Master Greatest Movies of All Time list that has every graded movie we've ever discussed on the show, there's a link in the episode description of every episode of this show, or you can go to RonnieDuncanStudios.com and find it as the top entry on the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast show page. That has the grades we've done so far for all 231 movies we've graded, and we continue to add more each week. Make sure to check that out as we go and follow along. Dad, do we have anyone to remember this week?
Yes. Jan Schweiderman, 52, American actor, Good Burger. George Foreman, 76, American boxer, producer, actor, and pitchman. George Foreman Grills, The Masked Singer. Big George Foreman, The Miraculous Story of the Once and Future Heavyweight Champion of the World, two-time Heavyweight Champion of the World in boxing.
And just simply because I will never be able to do this on this program again, welcome to Good Burger, home of the Good Burger. Can I take your order? And so we remember these here fondly for their contributions to the arts, with a moment of silence in their honor. Thank you. All right, let's make the transition to probably the longest segment of the entire show, Best Funniest Lines.
We're just going to read the script, right? From start to finish for 3 hours.
Possibly.
Okay, good. Just checking.
I'll start. Patton. Now I want you to remember that no bastard ever won a war by dying for his country. He won it by making the other poor dumb bastard die for his country.
Fixed fortifications are monuments to the stupidity of man. If mountain ranges and oceans can be overcome, then anything built by man can be overcome.
Patton to Bradley as he's about to put on his new stars. What's the matter, Brad? I've been nominated by the president. Bradley. I know, but it doesn't become official until it's approved by the Senate. Patton. Well, they have their schedule, and I have mine.
Patton. Rommel, you magnificent bastard. I read your book.
Clergyman. I was interested to see Bible by your bed. You actually find time to read it? Patton. I sure do. Every goddamn day.
Captain Jensen. What are you doing there, soldier? Soldier's getting up from the floor. Trying to get some sleep, sir. Patton. Well, get back down there, son. You're the only son of a bitch in this headquarters who knows what he's trying to do.
Patton. They're ivory. Only a pimp from a cheap New Orleans whorehouse would carry a pearl-handed pistol.
Lieutenant Colonel Charles R. Codman. You know, General, sometimes the men don't know when you're acting. Patton. It's not important for them to know. It's only important for me to know.
Patton to a doctor. One more thing. There'll be no battle fatigue in my command. That's an order. Battle fatigue is a free ride. Yellow Belly's ticket to the hospital. I'm not going to subsidize cowardice.
Patton. The Carthaginians defending the city were attacked by 3 Roman legions. The Carthaginians were proud and brave, but they couldn't hold. They were massacred. Arab women stripped them of their tunics and their swords and lances. The soldiers lay naked in the sun. 2,000 years ago, I was here.
You got to keep going with the rest of the quote. Do you not
That's
have
all
it?
I had.
Oh, well then I'll finish reading it for you. You don't believe me, do you, Brad? You know what the poet said? Through the travail of ages, midst the pomp and toils of war, have I fought and strove and perished countless times upon the star, as if through a glass and darkly the age-old strife I see, where I fought in many guises, many names, but always me. You know who the poet was? Me.
Colonel Gaston Bell. General McAuliffe refused a German surrender demand. You know what he said? Patton. What? Bell. Nuts. Keep 'em moving, Colonel. A man that eloquent has to be saved.
Patton. Rommel's out there somewhere waiting for me. Jensen. Yes, sir. Patton. You know, if I had my way, I'd send that genius son of a bitch an engraved invitation in iambic pentameter, a challenge in 2 stanzas to meet me out there alone in the desert. Jensen. I'll deliver it. Patton. Rommel and his tank and me and mine. We'd stop about 20 paces, we'd get out, we'd shake hands, then we'd button up and we'd do battle, just the 2 of us. And that battle would decide the outcome of the war. Jensen. It's too bad jousting's gone out of style. It's like your poetry, General. It isn't part of the 20th century. Patton. You're right, Dick. The world grew up. Hell of a shame. Dick, I want a 24-hour guard put around this area. If we don't, the damn Arabs will dig them up just to get their clothes. Our graves aren't going to disappear like everybody else's who's fought here. The Greeks, the Romans, the Carthaginians. God, how I hate the 20th century.
Patton. There's only one proper way for a professional soldier to die. The last bullet of the last battle of the last war.
Patton. This is where it pays off. The training and the discipline. No other outfit in the world could pull out of a winter battle, move 100 miles, go into a major attack with no rest, no sleep, no hot food. God, I'm proud of these men.
Patton. Captain Richard N. Jensen was a fine boy, loyal, unselfish, and efficient. I am terribly sorry. There are no coffins here since there is no wood. We will have a trumpeter and an honor guard, but we will not fire the volleys as it would make people think an air raid was on. I enclosed a lock of Dick's hair in a letter to his mother. He was a fine man and a fine officer, and he had no vices. I shall miss him a lot. I can't see the reason such fine young men get killed. There are so many battles yet to fight.
General Bradley. There's one big difference between you and me, George. I do this job because I've been trained to do it. You do it because you love it.
Translator. Excuse me, sir, but General Koskov would like to know whether you'll join him to drink the surrender of Germany. Patton. My compliments to the General. Please inform him that I do not care to drink with him or any other Russian son of a bitch. Translator. I can't tell him that. Patton. You tell him that. Tell him word for word. The translator tells him in Russian. The Russian general goes, tell him he's a son of a bitch too, now. Translator. Patton laughs. All right, I'll drink to that. One son of a bitch to another.
Captain Oscar Steiger. I'm not going to read this with a German accent, even though it was presented in German. Patton, sir, is a military historian. He knows that Sicily, not Sardinia, has always been the key to Italy. Patton will attack Sicily at Syracuse as the Athenians did. Colonel General Alfred Jodl. This is the 20th century. Steiger. But you must understand, sir, Patton is a 16th century man. And then he reads some examples, compares him to Don Quixote. Don't you see, sir? Patton is a romantic warrior lost in contemporary times. The secret of Patton is the past. He'll urge an attack on Sicily because that's what the Athenians did.
Patton. Now there's another thing I want you to remember. I don't want to get any messages saying that we are holding our position. We're not holding anything. Let the Hun do that. We are advancing constantly, and we're not interested in holding on to anything except the enemy. We're going to hold on to him by the nose, and we're going to kick him in the ass. We're going to kick the hell out of him all the time, and we're going to go through him like crap through a goose.
I'm out.
General Sir Harold Alexander. You know, George, you'd have made a great marshal for Napoleon if you'd lived in the 18th century. Patton. But I did, Sir Alex. I did.
Patton. Now, there's one thing that you men will be able to say when you get back home, and you may thank God for it. 30 years from now, when you're sitting around your fireside with your grandson on your knee and he asks you, what did you do in the Great World War II? You won't have to say, well, I shoveled shit in Louisiana.
After the taking of Palermo, man, what about your language, General? Patton. Well, when I want it to stick, I give it to them loud and dirty. Then they'll remember it. Other man. What do your troops feel about that, General? Patton. Damn it. I don't want these men to love me. I want them to fight for me.
Patton. We're going to keep fighting. Is that clear? We're going to attack all night. We're going to attack tomorrow morning. If we are not victorious, let no man come back alive.
After discussing taking Messina before Montgomery, Bradley. I do know that you're gambling with the lives of those boys just so you can beat Montgomery into Messina. And if you pull it off, you're a big hero. But if you don't, what happens to them? The ordinary combat soldier, he doesn't share in your dreams of glory. He's stuck here. He's stuck living out every day to day, with death tugging at his elbow.
Patton. In about 15 minutes, we're going to start turning these boys into fanatics, razors. They'll lose their fear of the Germans. I only hope to God they never lose their fear of me.
Random soldier. There he goes, old blood and guts. Other soldier. Yeah, our blood. His guts.
My last one, Patton. Now, an army is a team. It lives, eats, sleeps, fights as a team. This individuality stuff is a bunch of crap. The bilious bastards who wrote that stuff about individuality for the Saturday Evening Post don't know anything more about real battle than they do about fornicating.
I've got a few more. One of them is literally Patton whispering into the ear of a wounded soldier that he gives the Purple Heart to. We have no idea what he says, but it's worth pointing out. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, after arriving in Messina to find Patton, is already there. Don't smirk, Patton. I shan't kiss you. Patton. Pity, because I shaved very close this morning in preparation for getting smacked by you. Patton to Bradley. Despicable. That's the first time in my life anybody ever applied that word to me. Bradley. Well, at least it's a personal reprimand. It's not official. Patton. The man was yellow. He should have been tried for cowardice and shot. My God, have they forgotten about all the people who've taken a hell of a lot worse than a little kick in the pants? I ruffled his pride a little bit. What's that compared to war? And then my last one. Patton to Lieutenant Colonel Charles R. Codman on the wasteland of the battlefield after they talk to the tank captain. Look at this cod. I love it. God help me. I do love it so. I love it more than my life. And I'm out.
All right. Let's move to the Stanley rubric then. Legacy is up first. This is the measurement of the legacy of the film as split between the audience and the industry. 5 and 5 points each for a total of 10. Roughly from 5 years after it came out to today, what is the legacy of the film? So that is about 1975 to today. So 50 years worth of history. What is the legacy of this film? Dad, would you like to go first or second?
I will go first. For legacy, normally I would give, this is not like the quintessential everything movie, but I will say this. If Coppola hadn't won the Oscar for Best Screenplay, I question whether he would have gotten an opportunity to do The Godfather, because I think it really kind of launched Coppola's career. So I'm going to go overall 4.5. Also to the fact that it won 7 Academy Awards and was held in such high regard for probably at least a decade. But for the public, it's faded. There are cinemaphiles who love it. There are historians and war historians who love it. But it's just not something that the general public considers a lot. So 2.5 for the public. So I'm at a 7 overall.
That's fairly reasonable. I am not too far off. I obviously can't attribute anything having to do with the Oscars in the moment for legacy, since that excludes that period of time. However, I don't think that the industry holds this as like one of the top best picture movies. It's very rarely mentioned in rankings above like the 50s. It's kind of this middle zone. It's, in some people's opinion, a wannabe Lawrence of Arabia. While you both hold it in personal high regard, I'm going to give it a 3.5 on the industry. And for the audience, while this is a dad movie, and I'm sure it's shown all the time on like AMC and TCM and random movie channels, especially around particular military holidays, I just don't necessarily see this being something that the average person is going to be introduced to that's under 40 that would say, let's watch a near 3-hour biopic on a military guy from a war from 80 years ago when I really don't even care that much about history. So in that sense, I'm going to give it a 3. I'm at a 6.5.
I think that this is one of the ones for me, having known this movie for the vast majority of my life, that it cuts a little deep, that I can't give it super high marks. Because you said it, I personally am so into this movie, but reflecting on the lasting legacy of it, it's not even the same. The legacy of this movie is not even the same as what it was when I was a kid, when I first saw it, right? So when I was 10 years old, forever ago, it still held some sway, but now 55 years on, it doesn't. I think, audience, I'm going to give it a 3. I feel like that's probably a little bit generous because I think, Tom, you've already stated most cinephiles aren't regarding it as highly as they once did. You do need to kind of know, I think, a lot of history to really, truly appreciate it. And that's just kind of not a thing anymore, especially with Saving Private Ryan, for example. I think kind of taking so much of that spotlight for sort of quintessential World War II movie now. Industry, again, I think this is a hard one. I'm probably I'm going to give it probably, I think, 5, just because it's, again, nobody talks about it. Nobody's trying to remake it or like copy what it does. It is what it is, and its gleam is somewhat tarnished. I think nobody's taken it out to polish it off. So that gives me a 6.5. Oh, it kills me. It kills me to say that, but yeah, 6.5.
So you match my 6.5, and that is a 6.67 average between the three of us. Impact and significance. This is a measurement of the impact and significance of the film in the moment that it was made, roughly the initial 5 years after it came out, so roughly 1970 to 1975. What is the impact and significance of this film as felt by both the industry and the audience? Again, we split this category 5 and 5 points between those two groups for a total of 10. I will go first here. On an industry level, I do think it was somewhat significant, but it's hard for me to say this is like a full 5 given the history of other movies during the 70s and even a few of them during the 60s. You have like The Sound of Music, you have Lawrence of Arabia, which in some ways this is copying. You have the Godfather movies, you have these enormous films, Jaws, Star Wars, that I would put as a 10 for impact and significance. And while this is a significant movie, I think it resonated just a tad bit more with the general audience, people like Richard Nixon, than it did necessarily even in the industry for as highly regarded as it was in the moment and as many Oscars as it won. So I have a 4.5 for the industry. I have a 5 for the audience. I have a 9.5.
I have a 9.5 also. Industry, I'm at a 5. It won 7 fucking Oscars. I mean, how many films win that many Oscars? Okay. I think the points down come on the public aspect because it was the 4th. And it was, if I remember right, it did well, but it trailed significantly from the top 3. Love Story was absolutely far and away the blockbuster of the year. So,
do you want me to answer your question that you posed? How many total films have won 7 Oscars is 13, including Patton.
Okay, how many in the 70s?
One other one.
Cuckoo's Nest?
No.
Okay, The Godfather?
Nope. That was outdone by Cabaret at the time.
Okay.
And obviously, Godfather Part 2 missed out on a few Oscars, like the catastrophe of Art Carney beating out Al Pacino.
But it was Art Carney. I don't know. So I'm at a 9.5.
So I think for impact and significance at the time, this is a 10. It is of the time. Won all of the awards. I mean, it obviously missed out on a couple, but highly, highly regarded by the industry at the time. For me, when I look at the other nominees on the list, yeah, I'm biased, but this is the only movie on the list that I am interested in at all. I think that it is head and shoulders above the rest, and it was regarded as head and shoulders above the rest. Love Story is blah, blah, and probably Love Story feeds into some of my disdain for Ryan O'Neal and Barry Lyndon. It's just, oh God. Okay, so
we weren't going to make this show about Andrew.
Okay, yeah. He should have me on for the 1971 year, and I'll just be like, Ryan O'Neal is garbage over and over and over again. So I think that there are so many things about this movie that were so highly regarded in terms of the number of nominations, but then the number of awards. How could it not be a 5? Particularly when you're talking about George C. Scott sort of defining himself as this role of Patton. In terms of the audience, sure, it wasn't a blockbuster like Love Story, but that's because they're completely different genre types of films. The highest grossing film in 1934 was Kid Millions, an Eddie Cantor disaster. Okay. Made so much money. It's a garbage movie. It Happened One Night won because it's a better film. Patton is a better film. Audiences...
Okay, so by that argument, we will assume that you mean Jaws is a garbage film for making so much money.
No. That is not what I said. I said the highest grossing film at the time is an actually objectively terrible movie. Okay? In 1934 and in 1970. I'm making a direct comparison. I am not talking about Jaws. Okay. When you talk about the audience, it's so perfectly timed to resonate with audiences. You really couldn't even make this film a few years earlier or even a few years later in terms of reaching an audience and having the audience respond. Again, my dad was 22 years old when this movie came out, so peak boomer, right? But he's going to the movies with his dad to see this movie that is a part of his dad's life. So it is happening so in the moment. So even though it doesn't have the same ticket sales because it's not barfy escapism and never having to say you're sorry, this film, I think, was incredibly impactful and significant for audiences at the time, and that also happened to be reflected in the industry as well. So for me, it is also a 5 for audience, and therefore it is a 10 overall.
Think of it this way. It was the third film, MASH. Okay? It was an anti-war film. This film is a war film, but it's also an anti-war film.
Mm-hmm.
So this one spoke to a generation of the past. MASH spoke to the generation of the present. So I don't know.
So that's a 9.67 average between the three of us. Novelty. Sarah, why don't you start this one?
So this is broken down into originality and then like filmmaking aspects, correct?
You are correct. I needed to give the precursor on this one before.
Okay.
Yeah. So a good reminder that I need to keep doing this for every episode for new potential listeners who
Correct.
may not be familiar with the scoring system. Novelty is a measurement of the originality of anything regarding the movie and the movie's overall execution for a total of 10 points, 5 and 5 for each. Now you may go.
Okay. So this one I feel is rather straightforward, but maybe not in the way that you would expect. I think in terms of the filmmaking, there's not a lot of innovation going on. It is very standard in terms of it being a sweeping epic in the cinematography, and I wish I had the opportunity to watch it on the big screen. I think it would be even more impactful as an audience member. You have a fantastic script, but the way that things are presented on screen, even though it was highly regarded in the industry at the time with its Academy Awards, not a lot of originality going on in the filmmaking or novelty in the filmmaking. So I'm going to give it a 3 for that. And now I know you may not agree with me on this one, but in terms of originality, I'm going to give it a 5. It's not because there's never been another war film, okay, before or after, but it is the singular film telling the story of this particular man, Patton. People are not scrambling to tell this story or remake it or put a different spin on it. I think the fact that the screenplay won an Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay or stuff that's adapted from other material, I think is important to recognize the innovation that was going on in storytelling specifically for this story and the nuance that is going on with presenting Patton as both a hero and something of a villain. The fact that we like him and we dislike him, we love to hate him and hate to love him, I think is sort of unmatched in film in terms of telling these types of stories, particularly from that era. You don't have a character like him in Saving Private Ryan, for example. Everybody's just kind of good, more or less, right? You have villains who are presented in other films about the era who are always on the axis side, right? So for me, I think that the originality of this film comes in the script and Patton being the focus and him not being held up as some paragon of virtue, but for the deeply flawed person he actually was. So I'm going to give it a 5 for originality. So novelty overall would be an 8.
Okay, I'm just going to go pretty well against what you had there. I think this is very derivative. One, it's speaking to a specific generation of people, the silent majority, let's say, who probably really appreciated this movie comparative to the counterculturists of the time, where they are drawing upon the greatest generation and celebrating their patriotism and their heroism of what they accomplished through war. And it's drawing upon a lot of the old World War II films. Not that I would say it's derivative of that, but I want to say it's fairly derivative of Lawrence of Arabia. And by that extension, I have that at a 2 for novelty, or excuse me, for originality. But I think the execution on the movie is where this is a much better thing. George C. Scott, one of the best actor wins, probably in the top 10 of best actor wins for his portrayal here. I think the script does extraordinarily well. I don't think there's anything exemplary necessarily in the direction or the cinematography, but they're at least above average enough that they're not like weighing the movie down. Is the editing fantastic? I mean, it does have a couple of slow moments for me, but for a near 3-hour film, it's not too bad. The musical score has already been complimented on this program. So I have that at a 4.5. I have a 6.5.
I'm trying to be fair with this. Novelty. It's a war film. It's a biopic. They had been done before. So I'm not going to say that it's, the concept is totally original. So I'm going to go with a 3 for originality. Execution. I think it is extremely well done. I think it also did something that biopics generally do not do, which is highlight the flaws in the character of the individual. So while I can't go to the full 5 for execution, I will go with a 4.5. So I am at a 7.5.
Tom, can you explain a little bit more how you're comparing it to Lawrence of Arabia? I see these as two completely different. There's sand in both movies. Star Wars also has sand. Those are 3 different movies. So for me, I don't want to send us off into the weeds. There are no weeds in the desert. But why is this derivative and copying Lawrence of Arabia?
Okay, so first off, it's kind of an epic. It's presenting him during a specific period of time, which is during a wartime situation. And while, unlike Lawrence, his story is not in some ways working with the people on the ground, it is somewhat self-aggrandizement. And it is a somewhat self-obsessed character who kind of says and does his own thing and kind of in a way treats himself like a deity by the end of the film. The reason that I would say it's derivative is that it seems like David Lean Light. The cinematography is very reminiscent to me of Lawrence, of how this is shot. The way that it's kind of generally scripted, not necessarily. I think the writing might be a little bit better for the line delivery in this, which to some might be blasphemy. And I actually think that George C. Scott as Patton is probably a better performance for me than Peter O'Toole, which again, somewhere in a Home Depot in Long Island, New York, Kieran is about to drop a plank on his foot. But
hi, Kieran.
I still think that this is in some ways trying to pick up that mantle. The reason that the script was written in 1963 is in somewhat reaction to Lawrence. So it's hard for me not to compare it, especially when there's a 7-8 year difference between the two, that one is not definitely influential on the other.
Right. So that's a chronological thing, but not necessarily a derivative thing. I'm playing devil's advocate here, obviously. Because this is an epic for sure, but so is Ben-Hur and the 10 Commandments and all kinds of other stuff. And again, all of those feature the same area of the world that is being focused on in this film. So I get it, but I'm going to disagree with you. And I just wanted to make sure I said that out loud.
No guest on this program has ever gone to the audacity of disagreeing with me.
I'm just cuter when I do it. It's okay.
And your arms are down by your sides. That is a 7.33 average between the three of us. My bad. Classicness. This is going to be potentially loaded category. So, Dad, why don't you start?
This one was a really tough one for me. A very flawed character who had a lot of issues, who is not somebody to be exemplified as a modern military icon. He is an anachronym.
Anachronistic? Anachronym is like scuba.
Okay. He's outdated. So to deem him classic is difficult for me, even though he is a historic figure. He does not age well as an individual. So even though he is a period piece, something that existed at a particular moment in time, I'm going to stick with, normally we've been starting at 6. I'm going to go up to a 7 simply because it does convey a true person at a particular historical moment in time. So, but I can't go really above 7 because of the reasons I've indicated. I'd like to go higher, but I just can't go higher than a 7 because he's not a very likable person anymore. When I was a kid and I used to, use my army men and play with my friend Dave, who was also kind of into military, we'd reenact the Battle of the Bulge, and he was a big hero. Now I've kind of, realized, it was more about himself than it was about the common soldier that he commanded. So 7.
I would agree. This is a very complicated film. As I led off the program with, I think a lot of his views are antithetical to what America is actually about, despite in some ways this entire film quite literally being wrapped in the flag and people using it for their own devices. The patriotism and the heroism are quite palpable. However, I think that certain people, much like Richard Nixon did, will look at this guy as being somebody who fought for a certain set of American ideals that some people think are proper, and that he was unjustly persecuted for doing the right thing. And so by that standpoint, while I don't think I can hold the movie completely up for that as far as points, I do have to knock it a couple because it unfortunately is the legacy of the film. There are people that take away and look at this film and say, oh, this was a great guy to live up to his ideals. Do I take that away necessarily? Do either of you? No, but there are people that are going to do that. That's why this film was as big as it was in the moment. It was the silent majority film comparative to MASH. And so by that extension, with those things built in, it is still a watchable film. I didn't have a terrible time with it, partly because Scott's performance is so engaging. I think it somewhat cancels itself out that it's probably classic now, but I'm going to end it a 6.
My turn. I will agree. This is a hard one for me as well, because I've already said this. I think the film presents him as a problematic figure from start to finish, and that what is good about the film is that it presents him as a problematic figure from start to finish. The struggle with watching it is knowing that this guy on paper is an absolute hero, but in reality is an absolute ass. Thinking about super, super controversial movies, right, that I know that you've discussed, Gone with the Wind, for example, and how uncomfortable does it make us when we're watching it now in the 21st century. I don't think this film has that problem because it was presented more as a mirror. Now, was it, yes, in the moment you have people who absolutely lauded him as an icon, and I don't think that that's necessarily wrong when we're talking about the annals of history. And I think that the film deserves more credit for being real about who he was as a character. And I do not think that you can watch this film now and take away from it that he's this incredible guy who'd be idolized. And are there things that come out of his mouth that are absolutely horrible? Yeah. And I think that you're supposed to feel uncomfortable watching what he does. I think the very few people who would be like, yep, he's awesome, are far fewer than, say, the people who are reacting in a way that we don't want them to, for example, with Fight Club. And for me, I think it deserves, I'm not going to give it a 10 because I know that that would be facetious, right? I personally have a deep connection with this film, but let me tell you, watching this film as a child, I had one reaction. Watching this film as an adult, I had a different reaction. Watching this film as an adult with somebody who died in a war, I have another reaction as well. And for me, the meaning of the film is still powerful, even though at different stages in my life, I have taken something different away from it. It is still an amazing film. And I still think it's absolutely deserves to be the best film of the year. And I think it holds up under scrutiny. So I'm not going to give it a 10, but I am going to give it a 9 because I think it would be foolish to sit there and say that there's like 5 people in the universe who are like thinking Patton is the greatest thing since sliced bread, because people don't. I think people can regard him as he is presented as someone who is a genius, but who is also psychotic and deeply, deeply, deeply flawed.
So that is a 7.33 average between the three of us. Rewatchability. Let's get the 10s out of the way. Dad, go ahead.
It's not a 10. Because even though
you literally said when we were watching it on Sunday, I could watch this film on repeat all day. So how is that not a 10?
It's not like I will go out of my way to rewatch. So it's a 9.5. I will put it on periodically, and if it's on, I will watch it, and I can sit and watch it again and again and again. But I will not go out of my way to rewatch it. There are certain films that I will, on a regular basis, no matter what I'm feeling, will automatically put it on. This is one that I really, I mean, it's a story that's too familiar to me. I don't need to put it on constantly. So it's a 9.5. I'm trying to be as honest about it as I can, even though this is one of my favorite films.
Okay, 10 number 2.
Well, okay. I also can't give it a 10 because I didn't watch it for 20 years. I couldn't watch it for 20 years, right? So as much as this movie is a part of my life, and as much as I'm taking, I think, better lessons away from it than I did when I was younger, I could not bring myself to watch this film for 2 decades because I knew it was going to be too painful. Am I really glad that I've watched it 3 times in 5 days? Absolutely. I think it's an enjoyable film, but it's, again, I agree, Dana. I think it's not something that I'm necessarily going to seek out. It's something that I want to share with other people for sure. And there are definitely people in my life that I want to watch this movie. I want to see what their reactions are. I want to explain my connection to it. I want to see what they take away from it that will be different from what I originally took away from it and continue to take away from it. But I think that this movie in particular is a hard sell for most people. The length alone, I know, is difficult, and it's a war movie, and it hasn't been made within the past 25, 30 years. So there's all kinds of issues that come up, I think with that. I have a good time watching this movie. It doesn't hurt me in the same way that I keep referencing Saving Private Ryan. It is a movie that I cannot watch. I cannot watch. I've seen it dozens of times, and I have come to the decision that I cannot watch it anymore because it hurts too much. All Quiet on the Western Front, great film, masterpiece. That one hurts to watch as well, but I also like it more than Saving Private Ryan. This one, I'm able to put up a little bit of that emotional shield and would be able to watch it pretty much at any time, but I'm not gonna seek it out. I might be more inclined to say I'll watch the opening sequence because it's so iconic. So for me, admitting that I actively avoided it for 20 years, I can only go up to a 9. So I know that's pretty close to a 10, but I love this movie. I love this movie, but it's not for everyone anymore. Oh man, I'm sad. I'm sad about that one. But yeah, Dana and I are simpatico on this one. Yeah.
As for me, I have attempted to be more objective about the rewatchability category in recent weeks. And as such, I agree that this would be a very difficult sell for people. I think you can get them to buy in for probably about the first 45 minutes. The opening speech really helps propel that along, but the further on it gets, the more difficult the character gets. I think you start to lose some people. And I know that it is a little bit anecdotal, but I have heard some feedback from people that they are somewhat bored by this film. It's not their cup of tea per se. It's a nearly 3-hour war epic about one singular person. And if you don't really buy in on his character immediately, it does become a little bit of a difficult movie. So while I don't think it's unwatchable, I also can't go nearly to the heights that both of you did. I have a 6.5. So that makes it an 8.83 average between the three of us. For audience score on this one, we had a 75% for Google users and a 93% for Rotten Tomato users, giving us an 8.4. So to repeat the categories, we had a 6.67 for Legacy, a 9.67 for Impact and Significance, a 7.33 for Novelty, a 7.33 for Classicness, an 8.33 for Rewatchability, and an audience score of 8.4, giving us a final total of 47.73, and currently placing it on our list between From Here to Eternity and Interstellar at number 93.
I think that's pretty good company. I'm not disappointed.
So other Best Picture winners that are surrounding it, or other films of note, The Treasure of the Sierra Madre is at 87, Judgment at Nuremberg at 88, Shane at 89, Rocky at 90, From Here to Eternity at 92, you have Vertigo at 96, 97, The Bridge on the River Kwai, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance at 100, for what it's worth.
Yeah, that sounds about right to me, honestly, in terms of rankings overall.
As always, if you have any comments on our scoring, or you want to sue us for the plank that you dropped on your foot, or if you just want to spam our YouTube comment section, you certainly can do so as well. But you can find us at greatestaltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us at any of our socials at Gmote Podcast, including on YouTube. Or you can find us on our website, RonnieDuncanStudios.com/Gmote Podcast. Remaining questions for this one. I always have difficulty with any remaining questions for historical films, because anything that's open-ended or anything that you really want to know, you could probably just go research yourself on Wikipedia or wherever. So I really don't have any.
Do you think that this is such a rhetorical question and there's no answer? Do we think that if Patton had been given free reign like he wanted, the war could have ended earlier?
Yes.
Okay. I think so too.
Problem though is that it was a coalition, and
yeah,
you just had to do certain things. There was political expedience that was necessary.
right.
Eisenhower understood it. Bradley bought into it.
Right.
Patton didn't.
Right. Well, and he admits as much, right? This is what happens when your leader becomes an ally, right? And not just focused on your own country's stuff. You got to think about the bigger picture. So.
I actually pose not whether or not Patton would have been given full reign, but whether General Bernard Montgomery would not have been in charge of anything would the war have ended sooner. I think that had a much more impactful potential role.
The elimination of Monty, as they call him.
Correct.
Yeah, I think, potentially.
I regard him as a potentially incompetent general.
So, okay, here's a question that I have. Watching this as a child, you know who I'm shaking my fist at through the whole movie? It's Monty. And I kind of love that they all have these little nicknames for each other. Yeah, I'm concerned about Hitler for sure, but I'm pissed off. I'm pissed off at Montgomery for most of the film. And as an adult, I was like, that man needs a punch in the face. Get rid of that accent. he annoys me. I don't know if that's super historically accurate in the way that he's portrayed on screen, but oof, yeah, he was obnoxious.
So if there are no other remaining questions, I do want to thank our guest for being back with us again for her 5th time. She's now a member of the 5-Timers Club. I want to say that makes you the 11th or 12th person. I'd have to count again.
Yay.
Actually, I have a list here, so bear with me for 1 second. Because I did write this out on the actual tallies of who's in what category. Okay. So my mother had 15. Kieran's up to like 12. We have Rob Conlon, who's going to be on with us in a few weeks for his 10th appearance. My sister Sarah with an H. We have Allison, who was with us 4, and she's, I guess that was either 6th or 7th different one that she's been on. We have Shane Rogers, who will be back next week. Peterson has been on 5 different times. Andrew has been on 5 times. So that makes it 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You are the 9th.
Ooh.
To cross the barrier. Although we will have at least one more
The
entrant.
Rubicon.
Yes, into the 5-Timers Club here by the end of the year.
That's awesome. Good job.
But I don't believe you will be back with us again until it looks like maybe late next season currently.
I think so. I specifically avoided wanting to do the revisit for Jaws. It is my favorite movie, but I was like, how boring would it be to have a super fan on that episode? I would rather just listen and yell at you while I'm listening.
We have a different super fan on, and the last time we did it, we had a super fan on, and
right.
Yeah,
I totally get it, which is why I was like, oh, I really want to do that one. No, Sarah, spread the love. Let someone else enjoy talking about it, and I'm going to enjoy listening to it. So yeah, I think it'll be a while, but if there's any other time you want to invite me on, I'll absolutely do it. So
okay, fill in guest it is.
Yes. I mean,
I'm trying to think, who is the fill-in guest all the time for Carson?
Joan Rivers.
There you go. You'll be our Joan Rivers.
Perfect.
That makes sense with your Vegas ties.
Oh, good Lord. I'm just thinking about the movies that I've done with you, and they've all been in the 70s. And so it's like I live in the 1930s, in the 1970s.
No, you did. The first movie with us was 12 Angry Men. That's 57.
Oh, you're right. All the movies I've done this year. I forgot 12 Angry Men. That is correct. Okay. Thank you for the correction, the redirection. But it's super funny that the last one that we did together was Shampoo, which is a totally different experience than talking about this film. So,
yes, but you're also the furthest booked out guest I have, tied with Andrew.
Yes.
Because we currently have on the schedule for 2029 to do Revenge of the Nerds.
Yay!
We have Revenge of the Nerds. Oh my God. Classicness 1.
That's gonna be so fun. So terrible. It's so fun. Oh, that's right.
I love the film, but it's so bad.
It is so bad.
It definitely has not aged well. But remind everybody what you're working on and where they can find you.
Yeah, so Shea Cinema is the show. You can find us on all streaming platforms. We are releasing new episodes pretty soon right now after taking a big old hiatus. My dad is doing well. I'm appearing on other shows. You can find me on Instagram at Shea Cinema. I think I say I'm on Twitter. I never go there. You can find me on Threads, also at Shea Cinema. And finally now on Letterboxd, where I am going to be listing our seasons with all of the nominees and then putting up reviews written by my dad, but they're all in poetry form. So be on the lookout for those, because if you want to hear little poems written about movies from 1927, we're the profile for you.
An iambic pentameter.
He can't pull that off yet. You know what? Maybe that'll be our next challenge for next season. I said rhyming couplets for right now, but maybe next season I'll be like iambic pentameter. That would be fun.
And then haiku.
Yes, we could do that as well.
Remaining thoughts for the week.
For me?
Well, you always go first.
No, I don't have any. Need to head back.
Yes, I am ready to get out of this hotel room. So with that, we thank you very much for listening. We'll see you next week. Isn't it strange to create something that hates you? Next week for our 256th episode, we welcome back 5-time club member, comedian, and host of Midnight Facts for Insomniacs, Shane Rogers, to discuss a cult classic of 2015, Ex Machina, for its 10th anniversary. Written and directed by Alex Garland, cinematography by Rob Hardy, music by Ben Salisbury and Jeff Barrow. Starring Alicia Vikander, Oscar Isaac, and Domhnall Gleeson. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. Please like, follow, rate, and review, or whatever on whichever platform you have so that more can join in on our fun. You can also email the show at RonnieDuncanStudios.com or at GreatestAllTimeMoviePodcast@gmail.com, or find us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Letterboxd, or TikTok at the handle @GModePodcast. The Greatest Movie of All Time is a production of Ronnie Duncan Studios. Our show is mixed, edited, and written by Thomas Duncan. Our music is thanks to Purple Planet Music. Our distributor is Captivate FM. Our technical provider is Riverside FM.